our midway keynote, if I can name it that, of our 7th annual Cosmic Conference, which is a 3-week virtual gathering running from March 25th to the end of this week on April 17th. Today is a special day for us, not only because we have coined the term midway keynote, but because today Cosmic Centaurs turns 6. And I want to use this not just as a milestone, but as a lens for this conversation. We were born in uncertainty in April of 2020, and 6 years later, we are operating in a world that, if anything, has become even more complex and less predictable than when we started. So what I want to share today about this idea of crisis and creation is not only drawn from research, which we love, because if you know us at all, you know that we're academics and geeks. It's also drawn from building in real time through uncertainty, no matter how small our experience is. This year's conference is titled Grounded and Limitless, Leading Organizations That Survive and Thrive. We are now more than 2/3 of the way through this conference, and the theme that we chose, this idea of being both grounded and limitless at the same time, has been underlying every session and every discussion. At its core, the reason why we chose this topic is because it underlies attention. This idea to have to stay grounded in what is in front of you right now, the pressure, the decisions, the uncertainty, but also at the same time, being expansive in how you think about what comes next, about possibility, about opportunity. This idea of delivering and surviving today without compromising tomorrow. The tension between the present and the future, exploitation and exploration. That is what we're exploring. And over the past couple of weeks of having this conversation, what we saw is that while this idea is not new or surprising to anyone, leaders understand it, they agree with it, they've experienced it in their own roles. What is more difficult is how do we develop this capability beyond the individual, right? How do we take this from being a leadership quality? I know I need to do both. I know that this starts with myself, but I still don't know how to make that happen inside the organization. That's where the real challenge sits. How do you take this idea of holding these tensions, which maybe as a leader you've understood, and turn it into something that shapes how your organization actually operates on a daily basis? Because when we talk about this tension, the first place we usually go is leadership. We talk about range. We tell leaders they have to develop the ability to hold opposing demands at the same time, to be grounded and visionary, decisive and open, focused and adaptive, to care about performance and engagement. And of course, there's a lot of research behind this. Models like the Universal Model of Leadership converge around this idea. Leadership in complex environments requires us to have the ability to hold multiple and often conflicting perspectives at once. Most leaders recognize this. They've developed that capacity over time. They've learned that their role is not to eliminate the tension, but to navigate it, maybe even to leverage it. And yet, this is where the limitation appears. The focus often remains on the individual. What we want to answer is not, do I, as a leader, have the range to hold these tensions, but how can I create a system that does not resolve in one direction, that does not favor one side of the polarity over the others? And while people understand this at the leadership level, what we often see in organizations is that actually they make different choices. Systems reward what is immediate, what is measurable, what is predictable. It reinforces delivery over exploration, certainty over learning, the present over the future. Over time, organizations become really effective at executing what they already know, right? We start to see the ability to adapt narrow, although the environment is becoming more complex. Last week, Wissam Adib in his webinar, he named something that I think is a great way of thinking about this. He observed that over time, organizations drift from optimizing for their primary task, the reason they were built, the value they set out to create, towards optimizing for their primary risk, which is protecting what they already have. The mission, what used to be a mission, becomes maintenance. Offense becomes defense. And the organization that was once created to create something new becomes focused on not losing what it already has. This drift from the primary task to the primary risk is what happens when systems go unmanaged. And it's precisely why resilience has to be designed. Why are you bringing up resilience, Marilyn? Well, I want to talk about what resilience means for organizations, of course. Gary Hamel describes organizational resilience as the capacity or the ability to continuously reinvent the business model, to adapt, to evolve, to change direction before the circumstances force you to. In this definition of resilience, resilience is not a response to crisis. It is a capability that you build continuously, whether or not a crisis is happening. And underlying this capability, and we spoke a lot about that with Claudia yesterday in her session, is the ability to listen, to make sense, and then to act. Listening is just being able to sense what is changing. It's being able to detect the signal in the noise. Making sense is that taking that signal and turning it into a new source of adaptability, new ideas, new constraints. But acting is the ability to then bring this to life. That is what an organization needs to be good at if it wants to be resilient, if it wants to be able to manage both the present and the future. And many organizations experience friction in one of these areas. That's what we want to talk about today. Because when we talk to leaders about this, they all recognize the importance, but they all say, okay, but practically, like, what do I do? How do I teach my organization to do this? Because what we often see in organizations is, on the first pillar, sometimes information doesn't travel far enough or fast enough. Look at any organizations that has gone bankrupt in the history of time, or that has failed in its market. Look at Kodak, look at Nokia. And what you'll find at the beginning of that failure is that information just didn't make it fast enough, high enough. And therefore the organization didn't respond in time. The second problem on making sense is information travels, but is dismissed as noise, and we don't actually sit down to make sense of it and try to see what it's trying to tell us. And then the third pillar is we do have insight, we do have ideas, we've made sense of things, we theoretically know what we want to do next, but then action doesn't follow. And oftentimes we see these as execution problems. Oh, let's fix the communication channels, let's improve the reporting, let's add another review cycle. But the friction runs deeper than that. It's not just that information isn't flowing, it's that the organization is not designed to do anything with uncertainty. It's designed to execute against what is known. That is a logic problem, not a process problem. What I mean by this is that in stable environments, planning provides direction. You analyze, you forecast, you execute. But in uncertain environments, that very logic loses traction. Because information is incomplete, conditions evolve quickly, and many of the most important signals only become visible in the data after action has been taken. Several streams of research converge around this idea. We're going to talk a lot about them with Jose Santos on Thursday, but I'm just going to give you a little preview, right? So I'm going to cite a few academics. That way you can also Google them. So Saravasti's work on effectuation shows that entrepreneurs often begin with what they have and they move forward through action. They adjust as they go. They don't plan. If you look at Saul and Eisenhardt's work, they show that organizations operating in complex environment rely primarily on a few guiding principles that allow people to act rather than detailed plans. In Gary Hamel's own work on resilience, he emphasizes continuous evolution over adherence to a fixed model. Taken together, these perspectives point to a clear shift. In uncertain environments, progress comes from learning forward. I'm going to say that again. In uncertain environment, progress comes from learning forward. And that's where these three capabilities that you see up here on the screen are essential. If you want to build a resilient organization, you have to build an organization that is good at listening, that is good at making sense, and that is good at acting. So let's break them down a little bit. Maybe I'll give you a few examples as well. Let's start with the listening piece. As we said, in many organizations, information exists. It just doesn't travel. Yesterday, in conversations with Claudia, who is an expert in private equity and turnaround management, that much was clear. She said, oftentimes companies that end up not doing very well already knew what was wrong. Signals are always picked up at the edges by frontline employees, by customers, by partners. They just don't reach decision makers in time. If we take examples that companies that have adjusted this capacity for listening, a good one is when Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft in 2014. One of his first moves, and again, Claudia really resonated with this in her feedback yesterday from turnaround situations, is walking the shop floor, as we call it. One of the first things Satya Nadella did was to sit with customers in working sessions where Microsoft engineers watched people actually struggle with their products. He called this customer empathy. What matters is that over time, it began to change how product teams prioritize their roadmaps. The insight wasn't new data. It was always available to them. It was proximity to reality that had been filtered out. In our organization, I always joke that I have a bit of a strange setup because I'm the frontliner of the company. I'm often the one who gets to deliver content, engage with leaders, think with them. And because I know the importance of the shop floor, I make it a point to come back with learnings, with observations of these interactions, so that the team members who are actually creating and delivering the work have direct access to relevant insights. So that's the first thing, listening. The second one is making sense. And here what we're talking about is the ability to create coherence out of all of these signals, integration. Different parts of the organization see different aspects of reality. Can those perspectives come together? Organizations that do this well create deliberate moments of sense-making. Moments where people come together, confront their views of reality, and are able to build and ideate and adapt accordingly. Andy Grove at Intel had something he called constructive confrontation. The expectation that any person in the room, regardless of seniority, could and should challenge an assumption directly. Not aggressively, not without being diplomatic. The point wasn't conflict for the sake of conflict. It was to prevent the organization from drifting into consensus that nobody actually believed. Another great example of sense-making is documented by Gary Hamel at Whirlpool. When Whirlpool decided that innovation had to become everybody's job, the challenge wasn't that people didn't notice things or didn't have great ideas. The challenge was there was no mechanism for those observations to be shared, to be examined together, to be made sense of collectively. So they created something called the iPipe. They trained 35,000 employees on innovation and then created a mechanism, an internal channel where the ideas and the signals from anyone in the organization could be surfaced, reviewed, discussed. The point wasn't just to collect ideas. We see a lot of this superficially. It was to create a shared process for turning what people were seeing at the edges of the organization into something the whole company could see and respond to. Noise becoming signal, signal becoming shared understanding, and shared understanding becoming projects. Now, when we have a project, the next problem is actually getting it done. As a company, we always like to joke that project management is a competitive advantage because a lot of people have great ideas, but not a lot of organizations have the capability of acting. One of the reasons for that is that the system is built to fund certainty. And new ideas are anything but certain. By the time we experiment with something and we have enough evidence to get it funded, the window often is in existence. One of our teachers, Mihai Ionescu, brought this to my attention. He says that most organizations have, budget categories like CAPEX for long-term investments or OPEX for running the business. Neither of those budget categories is designed for experimentation. New ideas are too uncertain for CapEx and they're too strategic for OpEx. So they fall through the cracks. Ideas don't die because they were bad. They die because there was no budget category that could hold it. Resilient organizations create a third category. Mihai calls it a StratEx, a strategic experimentation fund, a portfolio of small bets. The name doesn't matter. It's the principle that does. It's a budget that is explicitly designed for learning rather than delivery, with different criteria for what success is, what failure can be. Several large organizations have this. Shell has something called a game changer program. Any employee can submit an idea and receive a budget to run a first iteration of it. No full business case is required, just a hypothesis worth testing. Samsung has this. It's called the Venture Investment Corporation. Tata has an internal venture fund. They all operate on the same logic. Capital that is taken out of the core business, that is governed by different rules, that is explicitly designed to hold bets that the normal budget process would never allow for. Organizations that adapt well create ways to act without requiring certainty. The budget, the dollar budget, is only part of it. Another part of the budget can be the time budget. I remember when I was in my early career, one of the most beautiful examples of that, although of course we can go back and debate how applied it was, nonetheless, the signal was clear, was Google's 20% time, which any of their employees or staff or engineers could spend 20% of their time, that's 1 day a week, working on a project of their own choosing, unrelated to their core job, no approval requirement, no deliverable. And that sent a signal that the time budget of the organization was also available to be used towards acting, trying something out. And for us, acting is something that we, do on a daily basis. We really make a lot of calls before we have any full confidence. Of course, that's the benefit of being in a small organization. We launch a new offer before we have the methodology for it. We hire for capabilities we don't yet have enough work to justify. We make uncomfortable bets. Not all of them have paid off. I have a long list of ones that haven't. But the ones that do shape the direction of the company for years to come in ways that we couldn't have planned. And one of the biggest bets that we make every year is actually the Cosmic Conference. I think I don't remember the exact hours, but I looked at the number of hours that we invest in the conference every year. And last year was something north of 1,200 collective hours. And I'm pretty sure that if I had to run this through a CFO, they'd fire me. And I'm going to invite the orchestrator of the conference herself to join me now, because what we want to talk about is we want to talk about practical tools, and we'll take ourselves as an example, to help you think about how you can change the structure, the process, the capabilities, the culture, in order to enable the three pillars: the listening, the sense-making, and the acting. But before we jump into that, Tala, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. And also happy anniversary to Centaur's old and new. It's a really, really great day to be up here.
Happy Cosmiversary, as we like to call it. Tala, let's start us off about the Cosmic Conference. I was just explaining to everyone here that the conference is one of those bets that we make. And we've been making it now for 7 times, because this is our 7th conference. In which ways has it paid off in ways that we couldn't have planned?
Oh, in so many. I think, like the essence of the conference obviously is that we get to create a learning platform for everybody. And I think that we like to call ourselves curious learn-it-alls, but we don't like to learn alone in a corner. We like to learn out loud with everyone. The conference has really allowed us to not only broaden our network and definitely, of course, like from a business perspective, like spread the news about Cosmic, tell people, but it's also allowed us to really sense, to really see what's on the mind of leaders, to learn about everything from new frameworks. Like you quoted Mihai earlier, we would have not, been able to learn like as much as we did from him had we not collaborated on a meaningful opportunity. The conference has also allowed us to take topics and really integrate them into the ways in which we help leaders. I'll take the Cosmic Conference from 2024 all around leadership polarities. That was one of those topics that, really went from something we didn't know much about, and we wanted to set out and learn about it and help leaders develop their range and really help them be able to make sense of a complex world in a way that they could name what they were experiencing. And it's now such an integrated part into the ways in which we support everybody from executives and master classes all the way down to middle managers, like really giving them the language to say, I'm holding the tension between two things and I know how to do something about it. So, that's just one very practical way of taking a topic and learning it. But also the reverse has happened where we, for example, with leaders that we work with, talk a lot about holistic approaches and systems thinking lens to the problems that they are addressing. And we did the opposite last year, where we said, actually, systems thinking is a topic we know we work a lot with leaders to help. Let's go full throttle. Let's do the conference on it. Let's bring the experts, the academics, the practitioners to come and really teach us about it. And so that's one way where we did the reverse of taking a topic we do work with, but then really giving it a platform to just make sure that we left no stone unturned when it came to systems thinking and leadership. And I think we really did that. I'd love to know what else you had. What's anecdotes come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, just to kind of make that point about having the freedom to act. What I was saying earlier is every time a new team member join us, and they always happen to join us like before the conference, and then they see all the work that goes into it. Everybody's like, so how do we measure the success of this conference?
Yeah.
Do we get leads? And we have to sit down and re-explain, like, that's not how we do this here, because we're not trying to have this conference fit into the existing capabilities. The conference is our moment to explore. And whether we're exploring topics, whether we're meeting new people, whether we're building a new way of delivering something, a new product, so many of our products today were born out of the exploration of the conference and sensing whether people responded to something or not, whether they needed it or not. So much of our team's training, like there is no better drill than putting our team under the pressure of this conference and seeing how much they can sustain, even just for themselves. So I think there's a lot of benefit that come out of these experimentations like the conference that would never have made it through a typical review cycle. And that's what we are here to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's absolutely training ground for centaurs. It's a beautiful place to kind of come in and really hone the skills of the beautiful basics beyond definitely the topical expertise and, having the in-depth knowledge and the rigor on the topics that we cover. Some of it is also just, sharpening our knives when it comes to basic project management, being a great writer. Like, we tend to overlook some of those, but they're so important in any level of work, be it at the advisory level or, as a first time. And I think that there actually, Zainab sent us the hours. She sent us that we've worked for 526 hours on the Cosmic Conference.
For this month. Oh, good to know. We've got our time in half, everybody.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
526 hours.
Right there. Beautiful. So what we wanted to do today, so we understand this framework. And again, I have tried to give some really tangible examples. We're going to give a lot more, actually. I'm going to drown everybody in examples because what I find is always the hardest is we all understand these things conceptually, but then we don't have like practical ways of bringing them to life. And so we're going to talk about our framework. Why not? Because the idea there is in order to change the design of the organization, right? Like, because what we're saying is these things, the listening, the making sense, the acting, they don't happen by accident. Yes, they are leadership mindsets and leadership behaviors, but successful leaders turn these into organizational capabilities. And the way you turn a personal quality into an organizational capability is you design the organization intentionally and mindfully, right? So while we can name what capabilities we need to build the conditions for those capabilities to deliver agility, adaptability, future focus, experimentation at scale without depending on specific people being in the room. I gave this speech this morning to the team where I was like, last year at Cosmic Conference, so in October, I was already blown away by the capacity of the team to deliver this conference without requiring me to break in the process. This year, you've kicked me out of the process. I mean, I'm just the pretty face here. You guys have delivered incredible. And so I am a systems person. I'm not saying that I'm a better leader than anybody else. Who knows, what happens in the next 6 months. So I'm not trying to say that I have all the answers, that we as a leadership team have all the answers. But I am saying that it's our job to help people think about these things, that we've done it over and over again, not just for our own company, but for others. And that we've used a systems thinking model to do that, which is our model, the omnichannel organization. I'm going to put it back up on the screen here. And that today we want to use that model again to provide people with very small, very practical things that they can do in order to make their organizations more flexible, more adaptable, and more able to take on whatever the world offers, right? And we're going to go from top to bottom. We're going to do the strategy piece. We're going to do all of the organizational levers. We will stay out of the environment for today. Although, if you want to listen to more content around governance, you can join our chat with Jose Santos this Thursday afternoon. You can also join our conversations with many of the CEOs this week that are going to tell us how they've built this in their own organizations. So there's a lot of content still coming, but we're going to tell you about global examples, and we're going to use our firm as an example. And then we have lots of content this week for you to really double click on what it means to build this as an organizational capability. So we are going to start where we must start, which is strategy, of course. And the idea there is, of course, when we go into companies, we always try to see if people understand the strategy, if we know where we're headed. We spend a lot of time documenting it and communicating it and so on. And sometimes, we and the people on the other side have a tendency to once all of this hard work is done, we spent months researching, finding benchmarks and data and interviewing customers and figuring things out. And we've now documented the strategy, and we spent God knows how many sessions talking about it. And when all of this is said and done, we really want it to stop. We want to go back to working, right? That's what we call it. And so there's this big annual strategy cycle. And then when it's done, we move into execution. But then the market shifts and the plan doesn't. And what we've seen is that the best organizations have ways to continue iterating on the strategy process throughout the year. There is no end to the strategy process, in fact. And we've seen a lot of great examples, and in our chat, in our professional roundtable last week, of how leaders are continuously rethinking where is their market, who are they serving, how will they compete, what are the products they're putting out there. And so the first thing to know about how to do that is that the strategy process should never end. Spotify has a great way of formalizing it. They call it the DIBB framework. So outside of any big strategy process, teams can bring data, insight, belief, and a bet. So it's a continuous strategy process, because actually data, insight, belief, and bet is also what you do in your annual strategic planning and strategy process. But they have a process whereby they can do this any day of the week. So they say, what are we seeing? What does it tell us? So what? So what? So what now? What are you going to do about it? And what do you need in order to move this forward? And in that's a very simple mechanism, but that very much mimics the sense, right? Listen, sense, and act, where strategy becomes a repeatable discipline rather than an annual event. And I really love the language of bets, actually, because it liberates this idea that everything has to be certain, and really places it as a hypothesis to be tested, not a plan to be executed. Now, Tala, you and I are going to go back and forth between global examples and cosmic centers. I can't speak for myself, so I'll have you criticize how we do it. How have you seen this work?
I think a principle that we really believe in at Cosmic is putting progress over perfection. And so if we waited until the perfect time, if we waited until that opportunity to come and say, now is when we can try and test this, we would be waiting until, all our hairs turn gray. So the fact that we don't wait for a formal process is what allows us to be agile and put something out there where we test it. And I think our leadership team assessment is a great example of that. That came from conversations with clients, that came from the work we were doing with leadership teams in our offsites, in our capability assessments with them, and understanding how well, what is there for the collective team level, right? And if we had waited, until the next strategy cycle in 9 to 12 months, we would not have been able to come forward with the leadership team assessment that we're um, rolling out. We would not have been able to get the team, get a task force, doing some research, doing some benchmarking, working on the business while working in the business at the same time. So that ability to respond, that's the strategic capability that we really seek to help our clients build that muscle for. And it is a liberating concept to say, like, what you put out there, the beginnings of your work towards developing something is never going to be your final product. And if you just put it out, pilot, test, iterate, then that actually allows us to respond and not just have a great idea and then dust that idea off in 12 months when maybe or maybe not it's not as relevant, right? So I would say that that's, I won't critique us in this context. I'm definitely going to praise us and say that I think that's one thing that we do well is respond and deliver, even if that doesn't seem like strategy work, right? So it's really important.
Mm. Actually, on that note, I think Dubai and the UAE is a great place to learn this skill. I used to work in tech and used to say like, oh yes, tech is agile. And then I came here and I saw the speed at which I worked for a real estate company. So being an architect, I thought real estate is very like, strong and stable and doesn't really adapt. And it was incredible to watch the process that leaders use here. Because for me, I don't, I came from France as a work environment where everything is planned down to the minute. Everything has to be conceptually and practically sound, which again has its own values. But I came here to a place that was all about sensing and responding.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, strategy didn't matter as much at all, if at all. It was, can you detect something fast and can you respond to it fast? And I really learned that skill here in this city. And I don't think Cosmic would have been the same without it. So let's shout out to this context that has really taught us to work well at speed and with uncertainty. Okay, so yes, okay, Marilyn and Tala, I understand we have to iterate, we have to think fast, but then the organization gets in the way. So now let's talk about what is within the organization that we can do something about. And the next pillar that we want to talk about is structure. We always say, of course, that structure follows strategy, that you have to organize your troops in a way that will help you to deliver that strategy. But when the strategy is unknown, what is the structure that matches that? And, I spoke at length about this in our Dubai offsite 2 years ago, where we were talking about polarities. And of course, one of the biggest polarities that leaders face is this one. And that's when we spoke about ambidexterity, right? So what is ambidexterity? Again, I'm going to name drop a couple of academics. O'Reilly and Tushman studied organizations and looked at how their structure was influencing their ability to innovate. And they found that organizations that sustain both exploration, so innovation, future thinking, etc., and exploitation, they don't rely on individuals, they architect for both. But the way that they do that, because they looked at very different structural configuration, is that they separate teams, they separate budgets, they separate even the leadership, but they connect them at the top. So they integrate them at the top. And that's what they call ambidextrous organizations. There are a million great examples of these from all over the world. We're going to take in a couple. IBM, when they decided to build the IBM PC way back when, probably before you were born, Tala, they did not put the existing business. They created a completely separate unit in Boca Raton in Florida. It had its own team, its own supply chain, permission to source components from outside of IBM. And that structural separation was what made speed possible. The original thinking around ambidexterity comes from Lockheed Martin, where Kelly Johnson established this like rogue team that was called Skunkworks. Like he's famous for answering the phone and saying, hello, Skunkworks. And again, simple rule, physically separated, small team, no bureaucracy, close to the work. And this is the unit that produced the SR-71 Blackbird, which to this day is still the fastest aircraft ever built, right? It didn't do this despite being separated from the main organization. It did it because it was separated. We saw the same thing in Fujifilm. We have a great episode in Center Stage Season 3 about the turnaround of Fujifilm. And again, there, We saw that when they were faced with with the disruption of film by digital, they developed separate entities to manage their other business lines. They allowed them to operate independently. Kodak never did that. And so we know what happened. And so here it's really about, do you have a structure that is visible, that enables both the exploration and the exploitation, and do you have a good way to integrate them at the top? Because sometimes we set up the structure, they now run around and do some fun things, but then we never really integrate them into the business. Now, in our company, we are too small to separate units, but we always talk about time and place. So for us, we don't separate them in place. We don't have different structures for people pursuing this versus that, but we do separate things through time. Tala, what's your experience of that?
I was going to make the time and space reference because I view myself as a Centaur Black Belt to be able to quote Jose Santos, and everybody should tune into his session tomorrow. But I do think that it's so important to look at structures as not just structures of places or structures of the org structure, because people tend to think it's that, but also our structures of time. And that is what we own, and that is what we can have control over. Like you said, we're small, we're not, separating departments, but we are carving out the time. We're designing the time and we're designing the work around doing that exploratory experimentation, the creation. For us, it's really about making sure that we are really strict about, let's say, our strategic initiatives block. That's one way that we are working on the business, not just in the business. And I want to say that for us, we in professional services can always default to working in the business, to prioritizing the client work, to saying, I'll get to it, this is a priority, move that meeting. But we are honestly so diligent about this. I ask for permission to put a client meeting in that block because I know how sacred it is. And that's just really one of the ways where we make sure that we have a space to come to do that type of work, to dream, to diverge. Sometimes we're delivering on something. Sometimes the block is there to have a conversation, do a read back. We have a few others. Of course, we have this Cosmic Conference itself, like we are taking 526 hours out of the collective, time bank to create space to learn, to learn from others, to work on the business, to kind of make sure that we feel like we're responding and able to support the leaders that we're working with. And there's one more, I'll talk about it. It's actually one of my favorites. I was going to save it for another one, but I'll bring it up here. And it's called Grow Day. Grow Day is a ritual that we have around learning, and it's a ritual, and that's a form of really making sure that we carve out that time to say, can we dedicate 2 days per year to learning? Different organizations have examples of this. I think Spotify has a version of it. But really for us, it's about choosing, a topic and making sure that we have time to go and explore it. One of the ones that we did was in 2022 or 2023. It was around AI, not just the AI features that were, tagged on to every tech that we use, but really like how can we use generative AI as a power up tool, for us and our clients. And we dedicated a day for that learning, and it felt like honestly we were breaking the rules and we were playing hooky and we weren't at work, but we really were. We came back with some really meaningful insights, and it was a beautiful way to kind of come and say, like, look, we diverged. Did it result in a tangible product to market? No, not today, but that's okay. We're not here to necessarily meet that finish line mark. We're here to make learning a continuous strategic capability, and we have the structure in the form of rituals, in the form of time, in the form of platforms that allow us to do that, and that's how we design that work. So that's a few examples of how we do that.
And I think all of these examples are great transitions into actually the next topic, because structuring things through time is a process, right? So while we are too small to structure them into the organizational structure, we do structure them through time. And all of these examples that you just gave us are, in fact, processes, right? So, as you said, all good firms have great processes for delivery. Do we have a great process for learning? And all of these examples that you gave us are right there. We're not talking about approval gates, reporting cycles. We're not talking about outputs. We're talking about having a clear rhythm for learning, for experimenting. We gave the example of Google earlier with their 20% of their time. 3M had a similar one. 15% of time was allocated to work on self-chosen projects. Post-it notes came from that. Thank you. 15%. Atlassian has ship it days. These are 24
Yep.
hours where to work on specific problems, like hackathons. We've had those in the past as well. Um, you know, rethinking how we would build things from scratch. I think the idea here is, do we have processes and methodologies and tools, not just for delivering the work, but
Yep.
also for iterating? And that iteration can really sound like anything, honestly. And it's processes to review the process. So even iterating on how we deliver the work matters because that's part of our business model. And whether it's processes to explore, like the ones that you just cited around Grow Day, the conference, of course. We have a lot of processes. We bring in people from the outside to learn from them. We dedicate time to that. We have processes around our strategic initiatives so that they keep moving. There's really so much that we do in terms of ensuring that our processes are not just delivery oriented, they're also learning oriented.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just add to this here on the process piece. I think one thing that leaders tend to feel like they have to do all on their own is to manage the cadence and the operating rhythm of their team or their org. And it's honestly one of those pieces where we can actually delegate and empower our team around us to own parts of the cadence, to own parts of the process, to champion those so that I, as a leader, am not overwhelmed with everything that's on my plate. And also that my team has a sense of responsibility and ownership. So, for example, when it comes to some of our rituals, we are not the ones who own all of them. Actually, like we have Hadid, we call her our social chair. She makes sure that we have time to come together as a team. Engagement is super important. We also have Zainab. She makes sure that our cadence is really like respected. It's we're afraid of her, but that actually means that our system is one that allows us to own our time and make sure that we're adhering to the basics. Because in times of uncertainty, especially in a crisis, it feels like you need to drop everything and adapt and move. But actually, what can keep you going is that rhythm, is the consistency, is the predictability of what I can control, and that is my time. And making sure that we have that rhythm is so helpful and can really help a lot of us make sure that we can continue to power through the crisis and get to that state of creation, right? So,
Absolutely. We have three more to go through. So
yeah.
the next one is control. And I mentioned this earlier. The problem is that organizations, are designed to optimize for measurable outcomes, revenue
Mhm.
margin, utilization, on-time delivery, whatever it is. And so if that's the only thing that you measure in an organization, that's what people will, prioritize, and that's what they'll optimize towards. Again, another great example is, and again, you can be extreme about it or not, but Hire is a great example where they restructured their entire performance model so that they divided the organization into micro enterprises. Again, that's a structural choice. And then these micro enterprises were measured against market outcomes, not just internal targets, meaning it wasn't about did you hit your number that we said, it was like how did the market respond? And that in shift really reorients the system around external reality, speed to market, market orientation, customer centricity. Um, and I hate performance reviews and I hate target setting because I always say like the point is not to set the target. The point is to continuously reevaluate where it should be and be agile about it. And we've tried to really integrate that into how we do it ourselves.
Yeah. I love to think of our performance review as a system of success. So, what we're doing is really creating a way for our teams to succeed. We do that by offering clarity on what that looks like for them. So, yes, the process is really clear, but also we work collaboratively and, we're small and agile, we can do this, but to really set what success looks like, it's not just like, oh, this is my KPI, I have to meet this. No, we look at so many different elements of it. So, first of all, we look at your competencies. So, competencies being behavior, knowledge, skills. It's a mix. Some of us are technically very strong. We want to work on our behaviors, we want to work on how we show up. Our knowledge, developing that expertise is important. And then, very importantly, we have like learning metrics, right? So, what strategic initiatives are you contributing to? What are the ways in which you're working on the business to help us innovate, to help us create, to own something? And it's been beautiful to see on our team what people do, and what they want to sign themselves up for, and what are some of the ways that they feel they're contributing to delivering on the strategy in a way that we didn't necessarily mandate, right? In a way where we set that vision, but they were able to come up with the different ways that they deliver on that. I think it's just so important for us to also then just call that out to say, are they spending time learning? Are you investing in your growth, and are we as an organization enabling that? So, when it comes to our performance management system and the way that we work with leaders to design theirs, we really try and have it be that holistic approach to say, you need to deliver on this. We're looking at, what you're achieving, also how you're doing it, and what else is really being done to grow yourself and to grow the organization. So it's been a really beautiful journey to see how our centers have grown, and also all the many different employees we've enabled through integrating the system into companies. It's a testament to how capability development at scale can really happen if you have a good system for success.
Yeah, because if all we controlled for was project margins, then you guys would just sell the same projects over and over again, deliver them to death, and then one day we'd wake up and we wouldn't have any new products that are relevant for the market. So that's kind of a simple way of looking at this. The next dimension, we have two more, people then culture. The next dimension, of course, is people. Tala, you started talking about this, about building those capabilities. Tell us more about, obviously, people is the most important lever, but talk to us about how to look at it.
Yeah, I think capability development when it comes to people is so often seen as like, oh, our people, like, yeah, we send them on a training, or yeah, we gave them some merch when they joined the company, and our people are now taken care of. But actually, like, we always say organizations have a duty of care, and that is the true in peacetime and in wartime. And we have a duty of care to our people. We need to be okay with this concept of we don't always know, but we do know how to keep the system moving even when we don't know 100% of the context, or the crisis, when it's going to end. I think one thing that we heard from Claire Furlong is show up and communicate, right? Show up and be there for your people. Help them feel like they're a core part of the experience. Then when it comes to actually, making sure that we have what we need to navigate our people and steward them through uncertainty. Some of that is the development of our people, but some of it is just making sure that we have a lot of the basics. And sometimes we work with leaders to make sure that that's there as well. We like to do a few things around this, right? We like to make sure that people know that learning is an integrated part of the system. Even in times of uncertainty, we are navigating this together. Leaders to get up and say, I'm learning as much about this as you are, really makes that type of organization one where we are all showing up and learning together. And a way that you can do that, just very practically, when things are at peace, is if we're all learning together, great, let me bring somebody into a room on a project where they want a stretch assignment. Okay, wonderful. So in wartime, collectively, we're trying to navigate this. But when things are okay, I'm designing a learning moment for my teams that is very down to earth, not a Harvard 3-day training, but I'm putting them on a culture mission because that's something they're passionate about. And I think another one is just making sure that we have spaces for reflection and spaces for learning out loud. Retrospectives are a really easy one. Grow Day is a good one. This year, we're going to do a Grew Day after this conference to say, like, how did we grow and how did we learn? It's not an overly structured forum. We're just going to come together and share, the 3 best insights that stuck with us from this conference. There's no shortage of ways that we can integrate building our people through times of certainty and times of uncertainty. I know there's a really important one, Marilyn, that you're deeply passionate about, and that's around psychological safety.
I mean, on the whole, this idea is also not just that we continue helping people to develop and learn and stay relevant, it's also that we develop their muscle for being comfortable with uncertainty. Because actually, human beings are designed to despise uncertainty. We don't like ambiguity. And we're not necessarily all born being very good at it. The Lebanese like to joke, oh, we're so resilient, etc. It's actually because we've had to go through many rounds of boot camps of training to become that. And so one is giving them the capacity to be comfortable with uncertainty. And the other, as always, and Marie would be even more passionate than me, is creating a culture of psychological safety where people are comfortable to make mistakes, debrief them, talk about them. They know they won't be punished. They can come up with new ideas. So if we look at the virtuous cycle of psychological safety, we're comfortable admitting mistakes, we're comfortable learning from them, we're comfortable sharing new ideas, and therefore we're more innovative and better making decisions. And that kind of bridges us to our last lever, which is culture. We're going to quickly talk about the kinds of culture that, again, enable, innovative cultures, innovative organizations, and in some ways, this is going to be, a nice looping back into where we started this because it's all about the ability to hold tensions. Tell us a bit about the research, Tal.
Yeah. We actually unpacked this at length in our last conference, and I know Zaina's dropped the link to the chat, so I want to invite everybody to go there. Culture is how we deliver on strategy. Culture is how we engage and how we work as a team. And leaders try not to really talk too much, or they feel like they can't control it. They feel like it's very tacit, you can't touch it, it's hard to design. But actually, there's a lot of research, that tells us that cultures that sustain innovation are those that can hold that tension. They can tolerate failure, they have high standards for the work, but they are also okay with failure. Candor and psychological safety, collaboration and individual accountability, these are some of those kind of tensions that we see, and the work of Gary Pisano is really what proves that to us. I'll give an anecdote from Pixar. Actually, they have a ritual called brain trust. And senior creatives review some of the works in progress of the animations, and they give unfiltered feedback. They don't soften it. They don't beat around the bush. The directors can't say anything. They just have to sit there and take the tomatoes on the wall. Like, it's just, they have to listen. And it sounds like, honestly, so brutal, and you would think like, may the earth eat me up rather than be in that room. But it only works because it operates in an organization where we have a very deep respect um, of our purpose, and it's clear to us, right? Like, we respect you. I believe that you, Marilyn, can deliver the best quality output there is, and so I'm going to give you that feedback because you can do it. And you can't have that type of candor without having, a sense of safety. And so if you don't have them both and you just have either or, then you either have a culture where we say, yeah, everything is great even when it's garbage, or you have a moment where you just have like a horrible working environment, and nobody is, it's too tough to work in. So culture is such an important lever, and it is the one that can carry you through an uncertain time and allow you to continuously invent, if it's embedded in how you show up and how you work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always we start with strategy, we end with culture, because those things are always either reinforcing each other or destroying each other. And I think that as a company, to kind of bring us to a close, and again use ourselves as examples, because we really work really hard to try and be the companies that we tell our leaders to build. I think that's what we've been building towards. Yesterday I was writing a little speech to the team this morning, and I always go back and reference our values, and actually the values of an organizations are not like just words. They're the tensions we hold to choose. Like, for example, in our case, we have things like, over here we have curiosity and creativity, and that's really towards that act of creation. We have community and compassion, which is towards our human side, and we have discipline and excellence, which is towards our task orientation and our standards. And I think what you were talking about, Gary Pisano's research, it was really nice this morning to actually come to this realization as I was writing, these talking points for myself, that actually we have really from day one tried to have a system that does have tensions between the human connection side, the creation side, and the delivery side. And that's the word we're trying to create. And maybe also it's in our name. Centaurs are half human and half horse. They're both grounded in the earth, and they have their head in the sky. They balance all of these things, right? Like wisdom and intellect, strength and sensitivity. We try to be all of these things and to hold that tension and not to choose one over the others. And when I look at us and I reflected on the last 6 years this morning, I think that this is exactly what has enabled us to be what we've become. We're builders and we're thinkers. We dream and we execute. We're human and we're high performing. And we don't try to resolve the paradox. And it's beautiful that it's in our name. And that's the kind of cultures that really deliver this kind of innovation. It's a way of being, right? And it's built over time. We've given so many examples, but we know that it's built in hundreds of small moments by people and leaders and organizations that choose discomfort and that allow themselves to sit in it a bit longer than others. And what we've shown you today with the levers of strategy, structure, process, control, people, and culture, it's not about having a checklist, although a checklist is helpful. And if all you do is go through it and say, where can I intervene, and what can I change, they're helpful to help you think through it. But what I also want to say is that that is not a one and done job. It's something that you don't just implement once and move on from. It's ongoing work. We often use the metaphor of a gardener because an organization is a living thing. Gary Hamel also uses a lot of organic metaphors for organizations, and renewal sometimes is about cutting things off, and sometimes it's about planting others. Um, and so the difficulty really is in creating the conditions that allow that growth and that change to happen. And if I want people to remember anything from today, I hope that message is clear. Resilience is not just a leadership quality, although it is one. It is built through great design, how the strategy evolves, how the structure creates space and time so that processes can support learning, how you allocate resources and budget and time, how culture enables people to engage with complexity, and how we support individuals to build up their capacity for ambiguity. These are the elements that shape an organization's capacity to adapt. And of course, we used ourselves as an example today. It's very easy to do that now that we post-rationalize it. You don't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to build a resilient organization today. But I think that when you look back, that's how academics work. That's why they need time, right? They look back and they say, oh, and now I see things that I didn't see before. And I think, I'm proud to say that we've made a lot of good choices that have accumulated into something meaningful. But I also am proud to say that underneath it all, there's one thing that has never changed, which is we've always known what impact we want to have in the world. We want to make the workplace a better place. We want to help leaders build organizations where people do their best work. That has always been fixed, but everything around it has been flexible. I remember, Tala, when you joined, one of the first things you asked was, what do we sell here? And I said, I'm not sure, but I know what we stand for. I know what kind of problems we exist to solve. And whether we end up designing offices, developing software, or something in the middle doesn't matter. What matters is the clarity of this purpose and flexibility around the path of how we get there. That's what has allowed us to reinvent what we offer, but at the same time remain entirely consistent about why we exist. And so for me, the most honest definition of organizational resilience is not a destination. It's a system that you build continuously around something that you refuse to let go of. And I'm going to say it again because I love it. This sentence, a system that you build continuously around something that you refuse to let go of. And organizations that are enduring are not just, the ones with the best plans. They're the ones that keep showing up, keep learning, keep building. 6 years ago, we didn't know what we'd become. We still don't know what we will be when we grow up, but we know why we exist. And in uncertain times, that's enough. And in today's session, we've spent time talking about system, about structure, process, metrics, culture, about how to design organizations. And all of that, of course, matters. But I want to end with something that sits underneath it all. We're living through one of the most uncertain moments of our lives. As individuals and as a company. And in moments like this, I don't just look back to our purpose. I look back to the definition of an organization, right? The gift of building an organization is not the strategy, the product. It's the company you get to keep. The word company matters here. It's the people you travel with, the fact that you do not have to face any of this alone. System, structure, processes, these are all ways that we can be together in a way that works so that we can do something meaningful together. And I want to end this by saying how deeply grateful I am for the people in this organization, the centaurs, for what you bring, what you build, how you show up, especially in the hard moments. Hadil, Leah, Marie, Razan, Sabah, Tala, Zena, Zainab, but also all of our alumni centaurs. And I'm equally grateful for the ecosystem that surrounds us, our partners who believe in what we're building, our clients who trust us with their most important challenges, the supporters, the collaborators, the friends. You are part of this too. You always have been. This conference is one of the clearest signals that we've built something real. We are not fragile. We're not dependent on a person. This is an organization that can do whatever it sets its mind to. And so, as I always end all of my letters to my team, I end us with this: Centaurs, assemble.